You ever feel so alone the silence starts to have a weight to it? Like you could reach out and feel it pressing on your skin. That's where Ezra Blackwood lived, in the heart of that heavy, crushing silence. The year was 1887, and his ranch was a tiny, forgotten island in an endless ocean of grass. He'd buried his wife, Martha, 2 years back. Buried their baby boy right alongside her. And in that cold, dark ground, Ezra buried the man he used to be. What was left was a machine. A machine that woke up, chopped wood, mended fences, and checked on cattle. A machine that ate standing up and stared at the empty chair by the fire until sleep finally took him. He had built a fortress of routine to keep the memories out, a wall of chores to keep the grief from swallowing him whole. He liked the silence. It asked for nothing, it judged nothing. But on one perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, the silence screamed. He woke up with a start, not to the sound of the wind or the lowing of his herd. He woke up to a feeling, a deep, primal feeling of being watched. The air in his cabin was thick, electric. He grabbed the Winchester rifle by his bed, his knuckles white. His feet made no sound on the rough wooden floor as he crept to the window. And that's when he saw them, sitting on his porch. 3 of them, as still as statues carved from prairie stone. They were native women. Their faces were impossible to read, their dark hair braided and hanging heavy over their shoulders. They weren't looking at him. They were staring out at his land, at the endless sea of grass, as if they were waiting for something, waiting for a sign. Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs. This was his sanctuary. His isolation was a holy vow he'd made to his own misery. This wasn't just trespassing. It was a violation. He pulled on his pants, his boots, his mind a whirlwind. Were they lost? Starving? But there was no desperation in the way they sat. There was a solemn purpose there, a quiet dignity that made the hair on his arms stand up. He flung open the door, the creak of the hinges sounding like a gunshot in the morning quiet. 3 pairs of dark eyes snapped to his. He knew in an instant they were sisters. The same high cheekbones, the same steady, unblinking gaze. The one in the middle, the eldest, had the weight of the world in her eyes. The one on her right, younger, watched him with a sharp intelligence, taking in every detail. Him, the cabin, the rifle cradled in his arms. The youngest on the left had a chin tilted in defiance, but he could see the fear swimming deep in her eyes. "What do you want?" His voice was a rusty hinge, stiff from disuse. The eldest stood up. She wasn't tall, but she held herself like a queen. "I am Vivina," she said, her English clear and precise. "These are my sisters, Mesa and Neva. We have walked for 2 days." "This is private land," Ezra growled, his grip tightening on the Winchester. "Move on." Vivina didn't even flinch. "We were sent here, to you, Ezra Blackwood." Hearing his own name from this stranger's lips was like a jolt of lightning. He was a hermit. He went to the town of Redemption twice a year, maybe, and spoke only when he had to. How did they know his name? "Who sent you?" he demanded. "Our elders," she said. And then she dropped the bomb that would shatter his world into a million pieces. "They have instructed us to tell you," she said, her voice never wavering, "that you have until sundown to choose one of us as your bride." The words just hung there in the air. Insane. Impossible. Ezra stared, his brain refusing to process what he'd just heard. A bride? Him? A man whose heart was a cold, dead rock in his chest? A laugh burst out of him, a raw, ugly sound he didn't recognize as his own. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You've wasted a long walk. I'm not looking for a wife. Now get out of here." "We cannot leave," said Mesa, the watchful one, her voice soft but unbreakable. "This is not a request," Vivina added, and for the first time Ezra saw a flicker of profound sorrow in her eyes. This wasn't a trick. This was something else entirely, something desperate. "I have until sundown," he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And what happens if I say no? You just gonna sit on my porch forever?" Vivina's gaze was steady and heartbreaking. "If you refuse," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "our fate will be decided for us, and it will be far worse than a life with a man who does not want us." He looked from one sister to the next, Vivina, the leader, carrying a burden he couldn't imagine. Mesa, the observer, her hands calm in her lap. Neva, the young one, trying so hard to be brave. Whatever had driven them here, it was real, and it was terrifying. He felt a surge of anger. At them, for bringing this madness to his door. At the world for being so cruel. And at himself for the tiny, reluctant flicker of responsibility that was starting to burn in the ashes of his soul. He had built his walls so high, and these three women were about to tear them down with their bare hands. "Get inside," he grunted, stepping back from the door. "But don't you mistake this for a welcome." He turned his back on them, stalking over to the stove, his mind a raging storm. He heard their soft moccasins on his floorboards. The fortress had been breached, and the clock was ticking toward sundown. The day passed in a haze of tension. Ezra tried to stick to his routine, a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. He chopped wood with a furious energy, trying to sweat out the confusion. But he could feel them. He could feel their presence inside his cabin, like a change in the weather. He expected them to just sit there, waiting. But they didn't. After an hour, a silent conversation seemed to pass between them. Vavina, the eldest, picked up his old broom and began to sweep the floor. Her movements weren't meek or subservient. They were deliberate, dignified. She was claiming a piece of this space, this moment. Then Mesa, the quiet observer, found his mending basket. A shirt with a ripped sleeve had been sitting in there for weeks. She picked it up, threaded a needle, and began to stitch the fabric together with a skill that was so familiar, so painful, it sent a sharp ache right through his chest. It was the way Martha used to mend his clothes. He had to turn away, his vision blurring. Neva, the youngest, hovered by the door. She watched him split logs, her face a mix of fear and a strange, defiant curiosity. He refused to speak to them, but he watched them. He watched the way Mesa's hands moved with such purpose. He watched the way Vavina seemed to carry an invisible weight on her shoulders. He watched the way Neva flinched every time the axe fell. He was being forced to see them, not as a problem, but as people. The midday sun was a hammer. He drew a bucket of cool water from the well, the rope groaning. He drank straight from the dipper, the water a blessing on his parched throat. When he turned, Mesa was standing there, holding 3 tin cups. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her eyes asked the question. He hesitated. This was a line. Every small kindness was a step deeper into this madness. It was an acceptance of their presence, of their insane ultimatum. But to deny water to another living soul under this sun, that was a cruelty even he wasn't capable of. Wordlessly, he filled the cups. As he handed them to her, their fingers brushed. The contact was like a spark, a sudden shock of warmth in his cold, dead world. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Mesa gave a tiny nod of thanks and walked back to her sisters. Ezra retreated to the barn, needing the space, needing to think. A bride. The word was a ghost. Marriage was sharing a life, sharing a bed, sharing dreams. It was a promise of forever. A promise he'd watched turn to dust. To even think about it felt like a betrayal of Martha. And who were these women? Strangers from a world he didn't understand. Their customs, their beliefs, all a mystery to him. How could he bind himself to one of them? And how, in God's name, was he supposed to choose? It felt like he was at a market inspecting livestock. A cold, ugly transaction. A raw, ragged shout of frustration tore from his throat, and he hurled it at the empty, indifferent sky. The sound was swallowed by the vastness, leaving only a ringing in his ears. He was so lost in the storm inside his own head, he didn't hear her approach. The sky does not answer. He spun around. It was Mesa. She was leaning against the corral fence, her dark eyes filled with a shocking amount of understanding. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "To tell you that we do not wish this on you," she said softly. "This was not our choice." "Then why?" he shot back, stepping closer to her. "Why me? Why this?" Mesa's eyes drifted to the horizon. "There is a man," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "A white man. His name is Donovan. He came to our lands, the ones the government pushed us onto. He has papers from Washington, he says. Papers that give him the rights to our water, our timber, and to a wife from our people, to seal the arrangement." A cold dread started to seep into Ezra's bones. This was worse than desperation. This was a trap. He chose Vavina, Mesa continued, and a tear finally escaped, tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. But our elders, they saw the darkness in him. He is a cruel man, a man who breaks things for sport. They knew they could not fight him, so they looked for another way, a shield. The pieces slammed together in Ezra's mind with sickening force. Me, he breathed. They think I can be your shield. You own this land, she said, her eyes pleading with him to understand. You are a white man with a name, a deed. Your law would protect your wife in a way it will never protect us. It was a gamble, a wild, desperate, last-chance gamble. They weren't invaders. They were refugees, sacrifices sent on a mission to save themselves from a monster. The choice he had to make, it wasn't about picking a wife. It was about deciding whether he would be their sanctuary or if he would be the one to throw them back to the wolves. He looked at Mesa, really looked at her. He saw her intelligence, her quiet strength, and the deep, abiding love for the sisters she was trying to save. His anger at them evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard fury, a fury aimed at the man he'd never met. Donovan. He knew the type. Men who saw the world as something to be conquered, its people as things to be used and discarded. He won't just let this go, Ezra said, thinking out loud. If one of you marries me, he'll see it as a theft. We know, Mesa whispered. We are only trying to buy time. Ezra walked back to the cabin, his mind no longer fighting the situation, but analyzing it. He was a part of this now, whether he liked it or not. He stepped inside, and his eyes fell on Vavina. He no longer saw a stranger forcing an impossible choice on him. He saw the woman Donovan had chosen as his prize. He saw the proud, terrified woman who was willing to marry a broken man to protect her family. He saw Neva, clumsily trying to help fold a blanket, her fear a palpable thing in the small room. He felt the ghost of Martha at his shoulder. You can't turn them away, Ezra. You're a better man than that. He hadn't felt like a good man in a very long time. He had felt like nothing. But now something was being asked of him. The sun was bleeding across the prairie, painting everything in shades of orange and blood. The deadline was coming. Vavina approached him as he stood by the cold fireplace. The sun is setting, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could see in her hands. You must choose. Ezra turned to face her. This man, Donovan, he said, his voice low. What makes you so sure he'll honor this? That he won't just take you anyway? He wants the appearance of legitimacy, Vavina explained. He wants to be seen as an ally to our people, even as he robs us blind. To take a married woman, a white man's wife, that is a different kind of crime. It brings a kind of trouble he doesn't want. But before Ezra could answer, he heard it. The sound he'd been subconsciously dreading all day. The rhythmic thunder of horses' hooves. Too many for a single rider. He grabbed the Winchester, pure instinct. Through the window he saw them. 4 riders, dark silhouettes against the dying sun. It's him, Neva whispered, her voice choked with terror. Ezra's jaw set like granite. Get to the back of the cabin. Stay away from the window. The sisters vanished into the shadows. Ezra stepped onto the porch, the rifle held loose at his side, and waited. The man in the lead was big and ugly, with a cruel sneer permanently etched on his face. He pulled his horse up a few yards from the porch. This had to be Donovan. Blackwood, Donovan called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Heard you had some visitors, some strays from my land. They're not strays, Ezra said, his voice cold and level, and you're trespassing. Donovan's smile widened, but it didn't reach his dead eyes. No need for that. I have an arrangement with their people. One of them was promised to me. I'm just here to collect my property. Property. The word lit a fire in Ezra's chest. A pure, cold rage he hadn't felt in 2 long years. It was clarifying. It burned away the fog of his grief and left behind a single, sharp point of purpose. They're not property, Ezra said, taking a step forward. They're guests in my home. Donovan's eyes narrowed. I know who you are, Blackwood. The grieving widower. The man who wants to be left alone. Don't be a fool. This isn't your fight. Give me the women, and you can go back to your miserable silence. The taunt was meant to hurt him, to remind him of his loss, but it did the opposite. It reminded him of what he was about to lose all over again. The sun finally touched the horizon, setting the sky on fire. Sundown, the deadline. Ezra's mind went quiet. The choice was suddenly, terribly clear, and it wasn't the one the elders had sent them here to make. "You're right about one thing, Donovan," Ezra said, his voice ringing with a strength he hadn't felt in years. "I was a grieving widower. But things change." He turned his head just enough, raising his voice so the women inside could hear. "Vavina!" A moment later, she was there in the doorway, standing tall, her fear hidden behind a mask of courage. Mesa and Neva stood right behind her, a silent, defiant wall. Ezra kept his eyes locked on Donovan. "You talk about arrangements and promises," he boomed. "Well, a new promise was made here today." He took a half step to the side, placing himself directly in front of Vavina, a human shield. "This woman," he declared, the words feeling more right than anything he'd said in years, "has agreed to be my wife. Her sisters are her family, which makes them my family. And as of this moment, they are all under my protection, on my land." A stunned silence fell over the prairie. Donovan's face twisted from disbelief into pure rage. "You're lying," Donovan snarled. "You're bluffing, Blackwood." "Am I?" Ezra raised the Winchester, the movement smooth and deliberate. "There are laws, Donovan, even out here. A man has a right to defend his home and his family. You and your boys would be fertilizing my fields before the circuit judge even heard your side of it." Donovan's face was a mask of fury. He looked from Ezra's unwavering eyes to the rifle, then to the three women standing united on the porch. He was a bully, used to preying on the weak. He was not prepared for a man who had nothing left to lose, and had just found everything to fight for. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he spat, yanking his horse around. "You were my enemy the moment you decided a person was your property," Ezra shot back. "Now get off my land." For a long, tense moment, it seemed like violence would erupt. Donovan's hand hovered over his pistol, but he saw the absolute certainty in Ezra's eyes, the lethal promise. With a final curse, Donovan galloped away into the growing darkness, his men scrambling behind him. Ezra didn't move until the sound of their hoofbeats faded completely, swallowed by the prairie wind. Only then did he lower the rifle, a profound exhaustion washing over him. He turned. Vavina, Mesa, and Neva were staring at him, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and something else. Awe. The impossible ultimatum had been met. The monster had been faced down. The sun had set, and in the quiet aftermath, a new reality began to form. Ezra looked at Vavina, the woman he had just declared to be his wife. He didn't see a burden. He saw an ally. He started, his voice rough. "I meant what I said. My name, my protection. It's real. For all of you." Vavina stepped forward, her dark eyes searching his. She saw the truth there, but she also saw something else, a small detail that changed everything. "You did not choose one of us," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "No," Ezra replied, his gaze sweeping over all three of them. "I didn't choose a bride. I chose to stand." But as he looked at them, a chilling thought pricked at the back of his mind. He had played their game, followed their script perfectly, almost too perfectly. He had been their shield, just as Mesa had said. But what if the shield wasn't for Donovan? What if the shield was for something else entirely? The days that followed were a strange dance of quiet adjustment. The marriage to Vavina was a fact, a legal shield they all lived behind. But it was a marriage in name only. Ezra gave her the single bedroom, moving his bedroll out into the main room by the fire. A gesture of respect. The silence he once craved was gone, replaced by the soft murmur of the Cheyenne language between the sisters and the simple sounds of a house filled with life. At first it grated on him, but slowly it became something else. Company. They fell into a new routine. Vavina ran the household with a quiet authority that amazed him. Mesa resurrected the garden Martha had planted, a garden Ezra had let die. Green shoots pushed through the soil, a tiny resurrection. Neva, the youngest, discovered a kinship with the animals, her gentle presence calming the most skittish calf. Ezra watched them. He was learning them. He learned Vavina's sternness was a mask for a deep compassion. He learned Mesa's silence was a sign of a sharp, thoughtful mind that missed nothing. And he learned Neva's defiance was armor for a tender heart. But the suspicion lingered, a tiny splinter in his mind. One evening, he was cleaning his rifle by the firelight. The sisters were speaking softly, their voices a low hum. He didn't understand the words, but he recognized a name they kept repeating. It wasn't Donovan. It was Nahako. The name was spoken with a mix of fear and a strange kind of reverence. It didn't fit the story they had told him. A few days later, while mending a fence near the creek, he found something. A small beaded pouch, half buried in the mud. It must have been dropped during their journey. He opened it. Inside wasn't a woman's trinket. It was a man's pocket watch, heavy in gold. It was broken, the hands frozen at 3:10. On the back, an inscription was engraved in elegant script. To my dearest Jacob, forever yours, Elspeth. Jacob, not Donovan, not Nahako, a third name, a white man's name. The story was starting to unravel at the seams. He confronted Mesa that evening as she was tending the garden. He held out the watch. Who is Jacob? Panic flashed in her eyes, quick and undeniable, before she masked it. I don't know that name, she lied. It was a clumsy lie, a desperate one, and it confirmed everything for Ezra. You told me about Donovan, he said, his voice low and hard. You told me he wanted Vavina. You told me your elders sent you to me for protection. But that's not the whole story, is it? Mesa's composure finally broke. Tears welled in her eyes. Please, she whispered, you don't understand. Then make me understand, he demanded. Because right now I feel like a fool. A pawn in a game I don't even know I'm playing. Vavina and Neva had come out of the cabin, drawn by their voices. They saw the watch in his hand, the look on Mesa's face, and they knew the secret was out. Vavina stepped forward, her regal composure now laced with a deep weariness. Donovan is real, she said. He is a threat. That was not a lie. But he is a complication, not the cause. She took a deep breath. The man you called Jacob, his real name was Jacob Vance. He was a government surveyor. He came to our lands a year ago. And, Ezra pressed, and my sister Mesa fell in love with him, Vavina said, her voice heavy with sorrow. They were to be married. He was going to take her away from that life, give her a new one. Ezra looked at Mesa, at the silent tears streaming down her face, the skilled hands, the quiet observer. He saw her now as a woman nursing a broken heart. What happened to him? Ezra asked. Nahako, Neva whispered the name, her voice trembling. Nahako happened. Vavina took over the story. Nahako is one of our own, a warrior who believes our old ways are being corrupted by the white man. He saw Mesa and Jacob as a betrayal of our people, a stain on our honor. He forbade their union. When they planned to run away together, Nahako, he followed them. She didn't need to finish. Ezra understood. The broken watch, frozen in time, a final, silent testament. Nahako killed him, Ezra stated, the words tasting like poison. Vavina nodded, her eyes closed in pain. He declared that Mesa was cursed, that her love for a white man brought death. He said she must be purified by marrying him, that he would cleanse the stain. Ezra felt a wave of nausea. This was so much worse than a greedy land baron. This was a prison of culture and fanaticism. Your elders, Ezra said, the pieces clicking into place. They didn't send you to me to escape Donovan. They sent you here to escape him. Nahako is powerful, Vavina explained. He has many young warriors who follow him. The elders are old and they are afraid of him. They could not defy him openly, so they sent us away. They told Nahako they were sending us to fulfill an old treaty obligation with a white rancher. A lie to buy us time. And Donovan? Donovan arrived a month ago, she said. He heard the story the elders had concocted, and he saw his opportunity. He twisted their lie to his own advantage, claiming one of us was promised to him. He is a vulture picking at a wound that was already there. We were trapped, between a monster from our world and a monster from yours. Ezra looked at the three of them. Their desperation was no longer a mystery. It was a cage, and the bars were closing in from all sides. They hadn't just lied to him. They had trusted him with a truth far deeper and more dangerous than the one they invented. He slid the gold watch into his pocket. It felt heavy, heavy with the weight of their secrets. "He'll come looking for you," Ezra said. "Nahako. When he finds out the elder's story was a lie, he'll come." "We know," Vivina said, her voice resolute. "But with you, we have a chance to stand our ground. Without you, we had none." The prairie no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the calm before a storm with two names, Donovan and Nahako, and Ezra Blackwood, the man who wanted to be left alone, was standing right in the middle of its path. One threat he understood: a greedy white man could be dealt with. But the other, Nahako, was a ghost, a zealot driven by beliefs Ezra couldn't begin to comprehend. How do you fight a man who believes he's on a mission from his gods? The fragile peace they had built was a fantasy. They weren't just a strange new family. They were a garrison, waiting for a war on two fronts. And Ezra had a terrible feeling that the war was coming sooner than any of them thought. The attack came not with a bang, but with a whisper. A week passed, a tense, watchful week. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow looked like a man. Ezra taught the sisters to shoot the Winchester. Vivina was a natural, her hand steady, her eye clear. Mesa was hesitant, the recoil a painful reminder of the violence that had shattered her life. Neva was terrified, but she did it, her fear hardening into a grim resolve. They were preparing for Donovan. They were preparing for the wrong enemy. One morning, Ezra went to the creek for water and found it. A single eagle feather, painted black at the tip, tied to the branch of a cottonwood tree. It hadn't been there the day before. He took it back to the cabin. When Vivina saw it, all the color drained from her face. "It's a sign," she whispered. "From Nahako. It means a judgment is coming." The fear in the cabin was a living thing now, thick and suffocating. That night no one slept. They sat in the dark, the rifle on the table between them, and they waited. The attack, when it came, was silent and swift. Just before dawn, Ezra heard his horse let out a panicked whinny. He was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. He peered out the window into the pre-dawn gloom, and he saw them. 4 figures moving like shadows, silent as the grave. They weren't carrying guns. They were carrying torches. It wasn't Donovan's clumsy greed. This was something else, a ritual. "He's here," Vivina breathed from behind him. Ezra didn't hesitate. "Mesa, Neva, back room. Bar the door. Vivina, with me." He burst out onto the porch, Vivina right behind him, a heavy cast-iron skillet in her hand. One of the figures was already at the barn, about to set the dry timber ablaze. Ezra fired the Winchester into the air. The shot ripped through the quiet, a deafening roar. The figures froze. One of them, taller and broader than the rest, turned to face him. Even in the dim light, Ezra could feel the intensity of his gaze. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "Nahako." "The woman is tainted," Nahako called out, his voice a low, powerful growl. "She belongs to me, to be cleansed." "She belongs to no one," Ezra yelled back. "She is my wife. This is my land. You have no claim here." "Your laws are meaningless," Nahako sneered. "The spirits of this land cry out against this betrayal. We are here to deliver their judgment." He gave a sharp command in Cheyenne. His warriors didn't rush the cabin. They split up. 2 of them ran for the livestock pen, their torches held high. The other ran for the well. This wasn't a raid. It was an execution. They weren't trying to steal or intimidate. They were trying to erase this place from the earth, to burn out the taint and everything it touched. Ezra was faced with an impossible choice. Protect the barn? The cattle? The well? He couldn't be everywhere at once, and that's exactly what Nahako was counting on. As Ezra aimed his rifle towards the men threatening his herd, Nahako made his move. He didn't run towards the cabin. He ran towards the small, fenced-off plot of land on the hill. Martha's grave. Ezra's blood ran cold. Nahako stood over the simple wooden cross, his torch casting flickering, monstrous shadows. He was going to desecrate it. to burn the last sacred piece of Ezra's old life. It was a violation so profound, so personal, it broke through Ezra's tactical mind and hit him right in the soul. Rage, white-hot and absolute, consumed him. He roared, a sound of pure animal fury, and charged toward the graveyard, leaving the cabin and Vavina exposed. It was a trap. The moment Ezra was halfway to the hill, Nahako dropped the torch, letting it fall harmlessly to the dirt, and let out a piercing whistle. From behind the cabin, a fifth warrior emerged from the shadows. He had been waiting there the whole time. He sprinted for the porch. Vavina screamed. Ezra spun around, his heart seizing in his chest. He was too far away. He couldn't possibly get back in time. He raised the rifle, but the warrior was already on the porch, a long, wicked-looking knife in his hand. Vavina swung the heavy skillet, but he batted it away. He was going to kill her. He was going to murder Ezra's wife right on his doorstep. And it was all Ezra's fault. He'd let his own grief, his own past, blind him. The warrior lunged. Vavina fell back. Suddenly, a second figure burst from the cabin door. It was Mesa. In her hands, she held Ezra's heavy wood-cutting axe. Her face, usually so calm and gentle, was a mask of cold fury. The face of a woman who had already lost everything and would not lose anything more. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She swung the axe with all the force of her grief and rage. The axe slammed into the warrior's side with a sickening crunch. He let out a strangled cry and crumpled to the ground. On the hill, Nahako watched, his face unreadable. He had lost. He had underestimated not just the white man, but the women he was trying to control. He gave another sharp command, and his men melted back into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. The silence that returned was heavier, more terrible than any that had come before. Ezra ran back to the porch, his lungs burning. The warrior on the ground was gurgling, blood pooling beneath him. Vavina was pale but unharmed. Mesa stood over the fallen man, the bloody axe held loosely in her hands. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the aftermath of what she'd been forced to do. She had taken a life to protect her sister. She had met Nahako's violence with a greater violence of her own. Ezra looked from the dying man to Mesa's haunted eyes, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was far from over. Nahako wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He would see this as a confirmation. The taint was spreading, and he would be back to burn it out. But something else had happened on that porch. Something had been forged in that moment of terror. When Mesa had lifted that axe, she wasn't just defending her sister. She was defending their new home, their new life. The line between his and theirs had just been washed away in blood. As the first rays of sun crested the horizon, illuminating the gruesome scene, a new sound cut through the air. Hoofbeats. But this time, it wasn't the silent approach of Nahako's warriors. It was the loud, arrogant thunder of shod horses. Ezra looked up. Cresting the hill were 5 riders. At their lead was the sneering, cruel face of Donovan. He pulled up his horse, taking in the scene, the dead warrior, the blood on the porch, the exhaustion and horror on their faces. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Well, well, Blackwood," Donovan drawled, his eyes gleaming with malicious opportunity. "Looks like you're having a little trouble with the neighbors." He hadn't come here to fight. He had been waiting, watching. He'd let Nahako do the dirty work, weaken them, terrorize them. And now he was here to pick up the pieces. They had survived the night, but now the day had come. And with it, a different kind of monster. They had just fought a war on one front, only to turn and find the second army marching over the hill. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and trapped, and the sun was just beginning to rise on the longest day of their lives. Donovan swung himself down from his horse, the picture of casual arrogance. His men fanned out, their rifles held loosely but ready. They were a pack of wolves, sensing a wounded animal. "Seems to me," Donovan said, nudging the dead warrior with the toe of his boot, "you've got yourself into a real mess here, Blackwood. A feud with the natives. That's bad for business, and bad for your health." Ezra raised the Winchester, but his arms felt heavy as lead. He was bone-tired. He looked at Vavina, at Mesa. He saw their exhaustion, their fear. They couldn't fight another battle. Not right now. This doesn't concern you, Donovan, Ezra said, his voice ragged. Get off my land. Oh, I think it does concern me, Donovan chuckled. See, I have an arrangement, a business proposition for the lovely Vivina here. But this other fella, this Nahako, he's a disruption. He's uncivilized. He took a step closer to the porch. So here's my offer. You give me what was promised, the girl, and I'll take care of your Indian problem for you. My men and I were very good at negotiating. Nahako and his friends will disappear. Permanently. You'll be safe. You can go back to your quiet, lonely life. Everyone gets what they want. It was a devil's bargain, a tempting one. The thought of Nahako being gone, the threat eliminated. It was a powerful lure. But Ezra looked at Vivina. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also a defiant strength. He looked at Mesa, still standing by the body of the man she had killed, her knuckles white on the handle of the axe. They had fought. They had bled. They had stood their ground. To hand one of them over now would be the ultimate betrayal. It would mean everything they had just endured was for nothing. There's no deal, Donovan, Ezra said. Donovan's friendly mask dropped. Wrong answer, Blackwood, he snarled. I was trying to be reasonable, but that's fine. We can do this the hard way. He gestured to his men. The women are worth more alive. Blackwood ain't. But before his men could raise their rifles, a new voice cut through the tension. He is not alone. Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the cottonwood grove by the creek was an old man, a Cheyenne elder. He was rail-thin, his face a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Behind him stood a dozen more Cheyenne warriors. But these weren't Nahako's young zealots. These were older, seasoned men, and they were all armed, not just with bows and lances, but with rifles. It was the elder who had sent the sisters here. The old man walked forward, his steps slow but steady. He stopped and looked at the dead warrior on the porch, his face filled with a deep sadness. He looked at Mesa, at the axe in her hands, and gave a slow, understanding nod. Then his eyes fell on Donovan. This man, Donovan, the elder said, his English as clear as Vivina's, spoke of arrangements. He lied. He used our troubles for his own greed. Then he turned his piercing gaze to Ezra. And this man, Ezra Blackwood, he continued, spoke of promises. He kept his word. He gave my family sanctuary when their own people were blinded by hatred. The elder looked back at Donovan, and his voice became as hard as iron. Nahako is our shame, a son who has lost his way. We will deal with him. But you, he said, pointing a trembling finger at Donovan, you are just a thief, a snake in the grass, and your time on this land is over. Donovan was stunned. His plan had relied on them being isolated, cut off. He never imagined their own people would come to their aid. His face turned a blotchy red with fury. This is my claim, he roared. I have papers. Your papers are worthless, the elder said calmly. They were signed by men who have no right to give away what is not theirs. This has always been our way. A man's character is his law. And your character, he paused, his eyes filled with contempt, is rotten to the core. Donovan, seeing his plan and his profits slipping away, finally snapped. He drew his pistol and aimed it, not at Ezra, not at the elder, but at Mesa, the source of all his problems. But he was too slow. 2 shots rang out, almost as one. The first came from Ezra's Winchester. The second came from the rifle of the lead warrior standing beside the elder. Donovan staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. 2 dark red stains blossomed on his chest. He dropped his pistol, stumbled, and fell to the ground, the dust of the prairie he had tried to steal rising up to claim him. His men, seeing their leader fall, panicked. They threw down their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. It was over. In the silence that followed, Ezra slowly lowered his rifle. He looked at the Cheyenne elder, who gave him a solemn nod of respect. A bridge had been built between them, a bridge of trust, forged in violence and honor. The days that followed were a blur. The elder and his warriors took Donovan's men into custody to be delivered to the nearest fort with a story of trespassing and assault. They took Nahako's fallen warrior to be buried with the quiet shame he had earned. and they began their own hunt for Nahako to bring him to their own justice. When the dust finally settled, the elder came to Ezra's porch one last time. "You have made powerful enemy," the old man said, "but you have also made powerful friends. Our fight with Nahako is not over. He may return." "Let him come," Ezra said, and he was surprised by the conviction in his own voice. He looked at Vavina, Mesa, and Neva, who were standing with him. "We'll be ready." The elder smiled, a rare, warm thing. "The choice we gave you," he admitted, "was a test. We did not know if the stories we heard of a good man living here were true. We asked you to choose one, but you in your wisdom chose all three. You chose to be a family." He turned to leave, but paused. "The marriage," he said to Vavina, "the vow you made was under duress. You are not bound to it." Vavina looked at Ezra. She saw the man who had faced down 2 armies for her, the man who had put his own life on the line for her family, the man who had, in saving them, begun to save himself. She stepped forward and, for the first time, took his hand in hers. It was not a touch of necessity or accident. It was a choice. Her choice. "I am bound to it," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not by my elder's command, but by my own." As the elder and his men departed, a new kind of quiet settled over the ranch. It wasn't the heavy, empty silence of grief. It was a peaceful silence, filled with the unspoken promises of a new beginning. Ezra Blackwood had woken up one morning to find 3 strangers on his porch and an impossible choice to make. He had been a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life, but now standing on that same porch, surrounded by his strange, unexpected, and fiercely loyal family. He was no longer a ghost. He was a husband, a protector, a man who had found his way back from the dead. The prairie wind still whispered across the plains, but it no longer sounded like a lament. It sounded like a song. And for the first time in a very long time, Ezra Blackwood was ready to listen to the music. If you were moved by Ezra's journey from grief to guardianship and the courage of the 3 sisters who changed his life, then do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you don't miss our next story, because the tales of justice and survival on the frontier are far from over. Let us know in the comments what you would have done in Ezra's shoes. Until next time, watch your back and protect your own.